Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and video show which brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, and experience from hundreds of successful individuals, role models from around the world. If you're new to the channel, please subscribe so you won't miss an episode. I'm your host, Frits Bussemaker, and today I'm delighted and privileged to have a conversation with Charmaine Borg. Charmaine, welcome to the program.
Thank you for the invite, really. I appreciate it so very much.
Charmaine, allow me to introduce you to the audience. You are a professor at the University of Groningen, and you are a certified sexologist. It's actually a difficult word to pronounce. You're executive board, education board of a number of associations in this area, like the European Federation for Sexology. Educator, King's College and Groningen, the Netherlands, and a native from Malta. Which, for those people who do not know that, a very small island, independent island in the middle of the Mediterranean. So again, thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah.
And to the audience, I also wanted to share with you this book, because this is how we met. You wrote a chapter in this book, which is called If we know we were doing, it wasn't called research. So you are a recognized researcher in this topic around sex, basically.
Yes,
and also referring to this book, I want to make well, actually a very cheeky first question. And in your book, you state you've made your hobby your work.
Indeed, it feels a bit like that because maybe it is a bit of a catchy statement. But I am so passionate about this field of human sexology, and I feel that it has been neglected for far too long, especially female sexuality and female sexual pleasure. When we talk about sex in general, we prefer or we kind of allow ourselves to talk about sexual problems or sexual difficulties. But it's very hard to talk about sexual pleasure. I think this is a problem not only in sexology or human sexology. People in some areas in the world more than others, of course, but there is this tendency that we should not own sexual pleasure. And interestingly, the female organ of sexual pleasure, the clitoris, has only been placed on textbooks, reference books in 2021, which is interesting.
Really?
That's just now it has been placed on books because the only function is sexual pleasure. So it seemed it is not so important to put it on books. So part of our anatomy was neglected until very, very recent.
Okay. Hey, Charmaine, we're completely deep diving now into the topic. I want to step back just a little bit and ask you how you got here from Malta, growing up in Malta, and then all of a sudden having this role as a professor in Groningen.
So my first interest, I worked as a health practitioner in psychiatric unit, short stay psychiatric unit in Malta for about 5 years. And there I met a lot of patients that had problems with their sexuality. Mm-hmm. Malta being a strongly Catholic country, maybe there's more shame and guilt surrounding sexuality and pleasure. And I used to do focus groups, for example, when men would be taking antidepressant medications or anti-anxiolytics, and then they would have problems related to their sexual expression. For example, they would come earlier or take longer to come, or they lose that feeling of wanting to have sex that they experienced before. And I found it always very difficult to understand how this topic was completely neglected. No practitioner felt comfortable, or very few felt comfortable to approach the topic. And if the practitioner would not feel comfortable to approach the topic as one would expect, the person would have more difficulty to actually mention that, because we feel it. If our practitioner, the person we're talking to, have some difficulty surrounding the topic of sex, then we would never ask on that topic. And that's how kind of my ignition of interest in sexuality started, I would say. And I always read a lot of topics on this topic. And then I did my clinical psychiatry studies at King's College, my master's degree. And there is where I started becoming very interested in the topic. And I wanted to find a multidisciplinary team looking at such a topic, and Groningen was the ideal place. There was an anatomist, Yannick Georgiatis, that was active in this field, and Willebrod Weimar Schultz, who was a gynecologist, also very active at recognized worldwide, and Peter de Jong as a psychologist, and we kind of together we built this project. And after that, I kind of guided went through the areas that I find most appealing for me in sexology and human sex research.
Okay. You just share with me a couple of things which I find to some extent so awkward, in the sense, if you look at the internet, if you look at, you can say, the world around you, it's so, I would say, available, it's everywhere, sex, that what you're talking about, that it's still not, you could say, a research topic, separate areas. Any idea why that is? What's the taboo? What's the shame? Is that religion you mentioned, or is it something else?
I think religion is a big one.
Yeah.
However, the owning of pleasure, that remains to be somehow one of the reasons why sex keeps having a secondary position to other, perhaps considered more relevant topics like schizophrenia, depression, eating disorders, all these disorders that we keep putting and investing a lot of money in, take priority. For various reasons. It could be that indeed the devastation is more tangible in these disorders. But I would think, given that the main source of happiness is based on relationships, and part of intimate relationships at least is based on our sexual expression and how we receive intimacy. And so first I would think that from this aspect, it is really relevant to consider and give a platform to sex more than we have done in the previous years. And apart from that, and I think directly related, I would say, sex is more than penetrative sex. Yeah. For very long, and still nowadays when I'm teaching students, it comes up very often that penetrative sex equals sex. The rest is not sex. It's something else. We don't know what it is. So a lot of people have this difficulty to kind of see how large, how broad this topic of sexology is. It goes about how we express ourselves, yeah, how we receive pleasure, how we build intimacy with other people. And I think these cannot be neglected. I mean, these are very relevant features for our happiness and good mental health. I think they go hand in hand.
Okay. I was wondering, you talk very open and frankly about this topic, and probably I think your argument is going to be we should. But how often when you come to somebody's birthday party or gathering, whatever, and people ask, hey, so Charmaine, what do you do? And you tell them, do people tend to then ask follow-up questions, so tell me more? Or is it, okay, no, this is actually a topic I'd rather not discuss in this particular setting. So what's the general reactions you get?
I find this question funny, but very relevant as well. So in general, when I give a lecture, and we have large courses here in psychology, so I always have those lingering students, like say 5+, that they would ask some questions individually or send me emails after. But also at parties, first, in general, I get some giggles, or, oh, you do interesting stuff. Oh, that's a great way to be paid for such a job, like this type of level of conversation. But in general, I will also get those more serious questions, like, what is normal? How many times shall you be having sex in a long-term relationship to not be a disorder? Is it okay that I come way earlier than I would prefer, or my partner is not so interested? What can we do to improve our relationship? So now I think, and the more I grow in this field, the more I'm receiving the second type of set of questions, I would say, that people are deeply interested to know how they can improve on their sexual
But
relationships.
yeah, okay, but they're not asking questions. I mean, that's my assumption now. Say objective questions, generic questions. They're questioning about their own private situation. How can you coach and help them on a personal level?
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think people would know in my surroundings what I do. And sometimes if I have large scale studies, promote them on my social media, and then kind of people would ask me in relation to the studies that they saw promoted somewhere, or if we publish a paper and we translate the results to more accessible language, people tend to ask about it. Okay, so what do you mean by creative sex and long-term relationships? And then you get more content-based and yeah, information that has direct societal impact, I would say.
Okay, now you currently do research in one of the most liberal countries in the world. So where you can have this discussion, I'll say mostly without fear. A lot of the people watching this interview live in parts of the world where it might be more difficult to have this discussion. What's your take on that? Anybody who say, "Hey, I'm becoming curious," what should they do? Go to a country like the Netherlands and do research there, or can they do something back home?
Yeah, I think the boundaries might be different at every university, at every institution that a person is interested to do the research in, and maybe the ethical considerations
Sorry.
might be also quite different. So I have very limited information on what I can tell about this. However, if I take Malta, for example, as a country that is really with over 95% of Catholic believers or followers, I don't know how to say that. Um, I would expect that there is more precaution, if that's the right word, ethically, in order for such a study to start running, especially when children are involved. I also did some work with children from 9 to 16 years of age. There, you need perhaps more explanation.
Yeah.
But I think everything is possible if you provide the right resources and sources to support this work, and some attention to protect individuals that they for themselves feel that they are transgressing if they participate, if they want to know more, should be taken really seriously. Because if a person, I can be in a culture where I feel it's a liberal culture, but if I myself feel that, for example, a particular sexual behavior is wrong, and that for me is giving me a feeling of repulsion, of feeling dirty towards myself or towards my partner, rather than a source of sexual arousal. So this is at a micro level, but from a macro to a micro level, this feeling of transgression, wrongdoing, or the boundaries that we have around our own definition of sex and sexual behavior, and what's right and not what is less right, I think should be taken very seriously. And I have very limited information to really give concrete features that should be taken into consideration, I would say.
Okay, no, fair enough. Now, I was wondering, can you maybe take us along, say, what are the most common misconceptions in this on this topic, and what research have you done to disprove those misconceptions?
Yes, a nice question that makes me think quite a bit. At some point, it is a book actually that I would like to write about sexual myths. This is something that I really would, it's one of my goals eventually. And there are various myths at every level around sex. And I think one of the biggest myths is indeed what I have already mentioned, that sex is only penetrative sex and the rest is not relevant. But actually, if there is no readiness for sex, if there is no intimacy, in general, there is a higher risk of pain, for example. There is a higher risk that the person, generally the woman, because they need more stimulation, like clitoris stimulation, they enjoy it less. Then they would be less likely to look forward to have sex again with their partner. So this is a myth that does not serve us any good at all. Another myth is that sex should be always natural, spontaneous, ideally. But this is, again, another big myth that does a lot of wrong to us. In general, when you start a relationship, there's a lot of sexual arousal. There's more this electrifying need that you want your partner. And we tend to do it all wrong, because in the beginning of a relationship, you want everything to be perfect, that you're smelling nice, that you're very, everything is perfect. But as we go along in the relationship, in long-term relationships, then we generally take the relationship for granted. And some might say we leave the leftover for home. So when we're tired, we're not in it, and sex is again a task. No one wants more tasks. So we tend to, like avoid it or do it quick. But then it's really the reductionistic approach to sex rather than the whole enjoyment of the sexual experience. And I think it was also mentioned in the book, I always like to give this idea that for me, sex is a bit like eating behavior. So if you just go to a 5-star restaurant or Michelin star restaurant and you had to describe the eating behavior, you would say the texture, the explosion of flavors. I was hungry or less hungry, and who you were eating with, and what was the atmosphere, how you felt, etc. The presentation of the food you have in front of you. The same applies to sex completely.
Mm.
The temperature, the sphere, whether you just had sex or not, the feeling that you have at the moment. And if you reduce sex to penetrative sex only, just to mere effect of penetration, then it's the same as you say, my eating experience was good swallowing. That's how reductionistic we are being when we say sex is penetration. So that's the biggest myth that creates a lot of other myths with it. But this feeling of this myth that says, for example, that we need to be spontaneous and it will always be good. If it's a good relationship, it will always be good.
Mm.
That's again another one that does a lot of damage, and especially when you are growing up and exploring your sexual needs, your sexual wanting, your sexual pleasure. I think these myths that it always needs to be natural and good, it's also very confusing, because in general it's not the case. And a lot of people, we just did a preliminary study here at the University of Groningen with a number of female participants. We found that approximately half of these women, so these are young, healthy students from the most liberal Western part of the world, I would say. 50% of these women do experience pain at some point in their first sexual relationships. So it just tells, and they do not communicate it to their partner. For me, that was so big and telling that we do not know sufficiently about how to express our sexual needs, how to tell what we like and do not like, and to communicate it to our partners if there is pain. And related to this, in the clinic, when you say, when you have someone with pain, we say, stop sex, stop painful sex. The answer to that would be, but then what do we do? It's like they cannot see outside of the box of painful sex. So these are myths that are very troubling, I would say.
Okay. True or false? Thank you for that. True or false? Good sex is good for your health.
Yes, true.
Good. True or false? Good sex is good for your sleep.
Excellent point.
Yeah.
So it's not only true, it's excellent point.
Yeah.
Yeah, can I tell more about that? Because or I can tell
Yeah.
after.
No, go ahead. Yeah.
It's because we just published a paper that I think was quite novel as a topic, and the findings are so interesting. It excites me a lot. We want to develop the study further. And what we found is that, so just to give you some context, I always had the idea, and I hope I'm not giving any personal information here or private information, but I always had the idea from personal experience, but also from friends around me, that if you have good sex, then the tendency is that you feel you sleep better. Or if you do not have sex, but you masturbate by yourself, then people sleep better. And there is anecdotal data and information that people say why you masturbate, and they answer to that just to fall asleep, or because I had a migraine coming up. So there is this information, but there were no studies on that. And I got the idea, kind of, if sexual arousal and sex can weaken the emotion of disgust, which is a very strong emotion, that it's almost, yeah, I wouldn't say impossible, but very hard to unlearn. I think sexual arousal can be used also to help us in our well-being, like to improve our sleep experience and to reduce pain, for example. So we did a study where we looked at men and women, how they feel, what would they predict for themselves if masturbation and intercourse within a couple will improve their sleep. So their appreciation, not as a study, what they think. And they thought, as I also thought, that intercourse and masturbation will make them sleep quicker and will have subjective feeling of more restful sleep. However, when we followed them for 14 days, we actually found that only intercourse within a couple will lead to better sleep and not masturbation. Now, this is not a sufficient answer for us. It's very exciting to already have this relationship, like tested this relationship, but we want to know more. Want to know why is this? Why it's only intercourse? I find it very strange. Why masturbation not? Could it be that it's because there are two people, there is more intimacy. So the feeling that you're sleeping with someone else after, the oxytocin that is released, could this lead to better feeling of restfulness and lower sleep latency? And now we are running the second study, following participants for 21 days. And we're also measuring the intimacy, the quality of the relationship, as well as physical activity. Because if you run not close to sleeping time, but if you do physical activity, that might also, for example, help with your sleeping.
Okay, got that. Thank you for that. That's also a misconception out of the way now, at least the preliminary results. What for you are the big unexplored questions or topic in your field?
Yeah, there are too many, but I would, maybe, I think for every line of research I'm involved in, there are specific questions that I really would like to answer. Like, for example, the study that I just mentioned to you, I would say, how is it possible that it's intercourse versus or over masturbation that will lead to that? So I would need to know more, like delving deeper into this data to understand better why some porn or erotica will stimulate women more than other. What are the features that actually stimulate women? Also to counteract the myth that sex seems to be more appealing for men versus women. I think there are reasons for that. We used to use stimuli before in most of the studies that were targeted for men and not for women. So of course, then the activation of sexual arousal would be higher for men than for women.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of research lines that each of these lines have a lot of unanswered questions. Another one that I have, why we are attracted to X and not Z, and how can this attraction change as a function of many other factors again. How we change our attraction. If you are in, I don't know, like just to keep it one, when I was in Malta, I liked certain type of men. And then if you move to another country where people are and look different, then your sexual preferences might change, because we keep learning and relearning how we relate to sexual stimuli based on the experiences that we have and the proximity that we have. So yeah, there are so many unanswered research questions that I have.
Okay, so lots of parameters, a lot of possible research still out there. Now, I was wondering, where do you draw your inspiration from? Are there role models in this field of science?
In terms of inspiration, I think I get a lot from different sources. It can be from books I read, or TED Talks that I listen, or podcasts. Now I often run and then hear various podcasts. For example, Esther Perel is one person that inspires me very much. But the research that I'm generally interested in is more triggered by questions that I myself have, and that are triggered perhaps by clinical experience, by people that I speak to, by questions that are raised after lectures or during meetings, or from results that trigger other questions.
Okay, so not the Kingsley Report type of milestones, very big in this field? Well, I mean, answers no is also very valid, but
I would say no. It's more kind of these various sources with small effects then that kind of raise my interest, and as well in conferences that we organize or that I attend, that then you hear different talk, not necessarily in the field of human sexuality, but also from other sources. I think, okay, this is something that might be very helpful if we apply it in our field.
Okay. Now, also, last couple of questions, Charmaine, because I find it hopefully, like the audience, a fascinating topic to understand more about that. In your research, have you experienced, I would say, personal failures, or like, is it a bumpy road to success? And how did you overcome those?
Yeah, I think it's research. I find it's a very bumpy road. And it's very hard sometimes not to take it personal, especially in the beginning of your career, when you apply for grants and you get a rejection and you think, yeah, this was a great proposal and my CV is also quite good, but then you get a rejection, and that it's very difficult. I can talk only for myself, but also what I hear from my colleagues. It's very hard to keep distance from it and to keep the boundaries of that rejection with the proposal itself, rather than to take it on you. And the beginning also, when I would have a rejection or a major revision of a paper, it feels very personal. I grew out of that, I would say, but the grants remain to be quite personal. So it is a very exciting world, the research world, but it is a bumpy one, especially for a topic like human sexuality, where, as I said, it generally takes a secondary or a tertiary place compared to other disorders. And of course, if you compare it, for example, to oncology, cancer research, then you immediately would think that is more relevant. However, now we realize that with oncology clients or patients, there are a lot of sexual issues that are undealt with, and these people and their partners are not approached or assisted with their sexual and intimate relationships. So I think the field of sexology is very interesting because it fits really like a plug, I would say, with also many other psychopathologies and disorders and conditions.
Hey, Charmaine, I want to give you a compliment because during this whole interview so far, we've covered a topic which a lot of people would make a lot of people blush, but you also made it very clear to me and hopefully the audience that it's just another research topic which is worthy to pursue and learn more about. So Charmaine, can you maybe tell me what else do you do to put this topic on the map?
Yes, perhaps I can tell very briefly why, how this all started. And it really started from the idea that most of the sexual stimuli are very disgusting. So if you have to think for a second, the ejaculate, saliva, sweat, people are very disgusted by these stimuli across cultures. And at some point, quite some time ago, we looked at the impact of sexual arousal to see how it influences this perception of disgust.
Mhm.
And we realized that actually sexual arousal lowers, weakens the perception of disgust. And we also are more willing to come in contact with these stimuli when sexual arousal is there. Later on, thanks to this study, there was a startup company that wanted to find a way how to weaken the risk of rape. And
Okay.
this person, Rule, was interested to, after reading my paper, to look at the other side of the story. So what will happen if we induce aversive smells to kill genital arousal? And you will not eliminate rape by killing, for a lack of better word, the erection, but you would reduce the risk. And we tested it in our physiological lab, where we induced an aversive smell in the nostrils and controlling for that with just a solvent, a control smell. And after the men were already aroused, so it's not weakening the generation of sexual arousal, but sexual arousal, the erection was already there, that then we kill that. And after this study, which was a successful study, I would say, there was the production of a bracelet with the same smell that we used in our labs.
Mhm.
But in our labs, it was diluted 1 in 100,000, and in the bracelet we have the actual neat smell. And now the bracelet is being used internationally, and in some countries where the risk of rape is a lot higher than others, it is being very effective. And we ran a number of pilot studies where we could find that people feel more confident to just wearing it, not necessarily to use it, but just by wearing it, they feel confident to walk a mile. So I feel this was very nice from a clinical experimental psychologist as I am, to have a product or to contribute to a product with a direct societal impact.
That's a completely, I would say, unexpected outcome of your research, I would imagine, that you can actually protect women that way.
Yes, I think this Envy bracelet is really it was also not in my plans. It was really based on, and this is the beauty of research, that one thing builds on the other, that one research finding triggers the interest of another research idea. Yeah, I really believe this is the beauty of my work.
Okay, well, thank you so much for sharing that. A couple of final questions, Charmaine, if I may. First of all, I have to ask, where do you draw your inspiration from?
Yeah, I think inspirations are drawn from various aspects and different people, conferences I go. Yeah, when I'm running and I listen to podcasts, I listen to various researchers and clinicians, like Esther Perel being one of them. And in general, I think the inspiration really comes from within myself, that either triggered by questions I receive after research lectures I give, or by discussing with colleagues questions that I think, okay, this is puzzling. I would like to know more.
Okay. And now you mentioned you did not start your career in this topic. Do you see yourself ending your career in this topic, or could there be a moment in the future where you say, look, I've covered this, I'm going to do something else?
No, I have a very quick answer to that question.
Yeah.
I feel since I started my PhD, the more I delve into this topic, the more I realize how much there is to be done still,
Yeah.
and the more I love what I'm doing. So yes, now since I complete my PhD, it's 10 years in a couple of days. And I think it's definitely the place I want to end my career in.
Great. Well, then let's see for the next couple of years which topics you're going to explore even more. And again, I want to thank you so much for spending your time on The Brand Called You and giving us a little bit insight in how also this topic, which still makes a lot of people blush, how you can have a normal conversation about its health benefits and benefits in general. So thank you so much.
And thank you. And the brand called you because I really appreciate that you put sex on this very relevant platform. Thank you so very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to The Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for The Brand Called You.